The stop that changed everything. The late afternoon sun dipped low on the horizon, stretching golden light over the winding two-lane road that cut through rural Alabama. Monica Carter drummed her fingers against the leather steering wheel of her black Dodge Charger, her mind still replaying the courtroom proceedings from earlier that day. She had spent the last 8 hours on the witness stand, testifying against one of the largest cartel operations in the state. It had been a grueling session, but necessary. Every word she spoke had been another nail in the coffin of a trafficking ring that had destroyed countless lives. Now she just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and maybe indulge in a well-earned glass of whiskey. But something was off. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A black and white patrol car had been following her for the past 5 miles. No sirens, no flashing lights, just lingering. Monica knew the game. After more than a decade as a DEA agent, she had seen this play out before. Small-town cops with too much ego and not enough oversight, flexing their power over outsiders. Some did it for kicks, others because they knew they could get away with it. She took a deep breath, keeping her speed steady at 55 miles per hour, the limit posted every few miles. The Charger's engine purred beneath her, itching for more speed, but she wasn't about to give them a reason. Then, like clockwork, the red and blue lights flicked on. "Here we go," Monica signaled, easing onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching against loose stones as she rolled to a smooth stop. She turned off the ignition, keeping both hands on the wheel. She had trained agents on how to handle stops like this. Stay calm, stay in control, give them nothing. A moment later, 2 officers approached from either side of the vehicle. The first was tall and lean, his mirrored sunglasses perched low on his nose. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the setting sun. The second officer was stockier, mid-40s, his belly straining against the buttons of his tan shirt. His face was lined, not with age, but with the arrogance of someone who had been in power for far too long. Monica caught the name tags, Whitmore and Coleman. Tall one first. Whitmore rapped his knuckles against the driver's side window. She rolled it down slowly, keeping her movements deliberate. "Evening, officer." Whitmore's jaw twitched, his expression unreadable. "License and registration." She retrieved them from the center console, passing them over. Whitmore barely glanced at them before speaking again. "You in a hurry, Mom?" "No, sir." "You didn't see that stop sign back there?" Monica kept her face neutral. There was no stop sign. Whitmore's mouth curved slightly, an almost amused expression. "Step out of the vehicle." And there it was. The escalation. Monica didn't move. On what grounds? We'll discuss that outside the vehicle. She inhaled slowly. This was the part where most people panicked, where fear took over and compliance became their only option. But Monica wasn't most people. Still, she played along. Unbuckling her seatbelt, she opened the door and stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel. She kept her hands visible, her stance relaxed but alert. Coleman moved behind her, his hand resting on his duty belt. "Turn around," he said. Monica tilted her head. "Excuse me." "Turn around." Hands behind her back. Whitmore took a step closer, his fingers brushing the cuffs at his waist. "You got drugs in that car, don't you?" Monica almost laughed. The audacity. "You're joking, right?" Neither of them smiled. "I'm a federal agent," she said, her voice steady. "My badge is in my—" Coleman grabbed her wrist. Instinct kicked in. She yanked her arm away, her training snapping into place before she could even think. "That's assault on a federal officer," she warned. Whitmore's smirk vanished. "Lady, I don't care who you say you are," he said, stepping even closer. "We got probable cause. You fit a description." There it was. The phrase she had heard 100 times before. You fit a description. Monica's jaw clenched. Whitmore turned back toward her car, tapping his radio. "Dispatch, we got a suspicious vehicle. Possible drug transport. Requesting K9. And just like that, the setup was complete. Coleman's hand hovered near his taser. We're not gonna ask again. Monica's pulse remained steady, but her fingers curled into fists behind her back. She could take them both down if she wanted. Years of training. Combat. Survival. But she had to be smart. She slowly turned around, hands behind her back. The cold steel of the cuffs bit into her wrists as Coleman clicked them into place. They shoved her toward the patrol car. Whitmore still held her badge, twirling it between his fingers like a toy. He hadn't even looked at it. Then he leaned in close, his voice low and smug. Welcome to Crenshaw County, sweetheart. The setup. Monica sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her wrists bound uncomfortably behind her back, her shoulders pressed against the stiff vinyl seat. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and cheap cologne, the stifling heat of the late afternoon sun making the small space feel suffocating. Through the tinted window, she watched as Whitmore sauntered over to the open trunk of her Charger, his body language dripping with false confidence. The smug look on his face made her stomach churn with frustration, but she refused to let it show. She had been in worse situations before. She had faced down cartel enforcers, ruthless mercenaries, and desperate criminals with nothing left to lose. These two small-town cops had no idea the kind of storm they had just walked into. Whitmore let out a low whistle as he pulled the vacuum-sealed brick of white powder from the trunk, holding it up like a trophy. Well, he drawled, turning the package in his hands as if he had just stumbled upon buried treasure. Look at what we got here. Coleman strode up beside him, a pleased smirk stretching across his broad face. That's a damn shame, he said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. DEA agent, huh? Looks more like a trafficker to me. Monica's fingers curled into fists behind her back, but she forced her breathing to remain steady. She had known the moment they pulled her over that this was going to be more than just a routine stop. This was a setup, a carefully rehearsed one, judging by how smoothly they were playing their roles. These weren't just bad cops looking for a quick bribe. They were professionals at this, the kind of officers who had turned corruption into an art form. They had probably done this dozens, if not hundreds of times before, framing innocent people, extorting money, and ruining lives. But they had made a mistake this time. They had picked the wrong target. Whitmore turned back toward the patrol car, tossing the brick to Coleman, who caught it easily. You were saying something about being a federal agent, he asked, his voice laced with condescension. Because from where I'm standing, you're looking like a whole different kind of criminal. Coleman chuckled as he hefted the package in his hands. Ain't that funny? Thought she could flash a fake badge and scare us off. Monica met Whitmore's gaze through the window, her expression unreadable. She could see it now, the way he thrived on this, the way he enjoyed the power he had over people in these moments. He was used to being feared. He was used to watching people break under his authority. But he had never met someone like her before. She wasn't afraid of him, and that, she could tell, irritated him. The sound of the trunk slamming shut echoed across the empty stretch of highway. Whitmore approached the car, tapping on the window with his knuckles before leaning down to meet her gaze. Here's how this is gonna go, he said, his voice dropping to a mockingly gentle tone. You're gonna sit tight, we're gonna take you down to the station, and by the time we're done booking you, nobody's gonna remember you were ever anything other than a drug dealer. Monica tilted her head slightly, her expression calm. You sure about that? Whitmore's grin faltered for half a second before he recovered, scoffing. Oh, I'm sure, he said. Once we get you processed, your face plastered all over the news, no one's gonna give a damn about what you claim to be. You're just another criminal now. Monica exhaled slowly. They really thought they could bury her. That no one would come looking. That she was just another face, another statistic. But they were wrong. They had no idea just how much they had already lost. The ride to the station was long and quiet, the only sound coming from the police radio and the occasional murmur between Whitmore and Coleman. Monica didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was already thinking 10 steps ahead. They had planted the drugs. They had their fake probable cause. They had their lies ready to go. Now she just had to let them dig their own graves a little deeper. She had no intention of just walking out of this. She was going to burn their entire operation to the ground. Part 3. Welcome to Crenshaw County. By the time they arrived at the Crenshaw County Sheriff's Office, the sun had nearly set, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of the station's parking lot. The building itself was small, old, the kind of place where things got lost all the time. Paperwork, evidence, people. It was a place designed for secrecy, for covering up mistakes, for making problems disappear. Monica was led inside through the back entrance, her arms still bound behind her as Coleman guided her with a firm grip on her elbow. The interior of the station smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener, a poor attempt to mask the underlying stench of sweat and old leather. At the front desk, a grizzled sergeant glanced up from his paperwork, barely acknowledging her presence. "What's this?" he asked, not even bothering to hide his disinterest. "Trafficker," Coleman said smoothly, sliding Monica's confiscated badge across the counter like it was a meaningless trinket. "Fake DEA credentials." The sergeant squinted at it for a moment before shrugging. "Huh. Booking her in now?" "Yep," Whitmore said. The sergeant exhaled through his nose. "Put her in holding. We'll process her later." Whitmore grabbed Monica's elbow again, guiding her down a dimly lit hallway lined with holding cells. The walls were thick cinder block, cold and unforgiving. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of sweat, and something metallic, like old blood. He leaned in close as he shoved her inside the small cell, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "This is where you start thinking about how bad you just messed up." Monica didn't blink. "I'm not the one who messed up." Whitmore grinned. "We'll see about that." The cell door clanged shut behind her. Monica sat on the metal bench, rolling her shoulders, her muscles stiff from the hours spent in cuffs. She could hear Whitmore and Coleman laughing down the hall, their voices fading as they disappeared back toward the front of the station. She wasn't worried about getting out. That was inevitable. No, what she was thinking about now was how to make them pay. She tilted her head back against the wall, exhaling slowly. She had no phone, no access to the outside world, but she wasn't alone in this. There were rules, protocols. If a DEA agent went dark, people noticed, and if she didn't check in soon, she knew exactly who would come looking for her. Whitmore and Coleman thought they had her trapped, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Because Monica wasn't just going to walk out of this station. She was going to tear it down. The calm before the storm. The air inside the holding cell was thick with the weight of unspoken stories. The cinder block walls bore faint scratches, memories of past occupants, desperate for an escape. The scent of old sweat, stale cigarettes, and disinfectant clung to the air like a ghost that refused to leave. The dim fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering every so often, as if it, too, had grown weary of this place. Monica sat motionless on the hard metal bench, her back straight, her expression unreadable. Despite the lingering ache in her wrists from the tight handcuffs, she exuded an air of complete control. Her dark eyes scanned every corner of the small cell, committing every detail to memory. The heavy iron bars in front of her, the single security camera in the corner, its red light blinking every few seconds. The door at the end of the hallway that led back to the booking station. Every possible escape route, every potential weakness, she noted them all. She wasn't worried. She had been in worse situations. This was just another battlefield, and she had been fighting wars long before Whitmore and Coleman had even learned how to manipulate the system they so confidently abused. The difference now was that they thought they had won. They thought she was just another victim. That was their first mistake. Across the cell, a young man sat slumped against the far wall, his knees drawn up to his chest. He couldn't have been more than 20, his face still holding traces of youthful innocence despite the dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, his white sneakers scuffed and dirty. When Monica shifted slightly, his eyes darted toward her, filled with caution, curiosity, and something else. Exhaustion. "You new here?" she asked, breaking the silence. He scoffed quietly, shaking his head. "Been here 3 days." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a while. "They won't let me call my mom." Monica's jaw tightened. "Let me guess," she said. "Pulled you over for some made-up reason, claimed they found something in your car, then locked you up without a lawyer." His gaze snapped to hers, surprise flashing across his face before he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he muttered. "Said I had an unregistered firearm under my seat. But that ain't true. I don't even own a damn gun." He exhaled sharply, frustration etched into every tense muscle in his body. "I work at the warehouse over in Jackson. Been saving up for a new place. Had about $1,000 in cash on me when they stopped me. Soon as we got here, money was gone. Just vanished." Monica nodded, unsurprised. She had seen it all before. Dirty cops skimming cash from people they knew wouldn't be able to fight back. The perfect victims. Easy prey. "They do this a lot?" she asked. He let out a bitter laugh. "All the time. Anybody they think won't be missed. I know at least 3 other guys from my neighborhood that went through the same thing. They never even made it to trial. Charges got lost in processing, or their court dates kept getting pushed back until they just gave up." His fingers curled into fists. "Nobody does anything about it. Nobody cares." Monica leaned back against the cold wall, her expression hardening. "That's about to change." The young man gave her a skeptical look. "Yeah, and how exactly you plan on doing that?" Before she could answer, the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. Whitmore and Coleman. Monica didn't move as the 2 officers appeared in front of the cell, their smug grins firmly in place. Whitmore tapped the iron bars with his baton, the metal clanging loudly in the quiet space. "How's our guest doing?" he asked, eyes gleaming with amusement. Monica met his gaze, her face unreadable. "Comfortable enough," she said smoothly. Whitmore chuckled. "Well, enjoy it while you can, because come tomorrow morning, you'll be sitting in a courtroom with a very different attitude." Monica tilted her head slightly. "You sure about that?" Coleman scowled. "You got a real smart mouth for someone in cuffs." Monica smiled. "And you've got a real big ego for someone who's about to have a very bad day." Whitmore's smirk faltered just a fraction before he covered it up with a scoff. "Keep talking, sweetheart. We'll see how much you got to say when you're facing 20 years on drug charges." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping low. "You might think you're special. That badge might have meant something where you came from. But here, you're nothing. No backup, no fancy lawyers, just you and us." Monica held his gaze, her smile unwavering. "You really don't get it, do you?" Whitmore frowned. "You think I'm alone," she said, her voice smooth as steel. "You think nobody's coming, that you can just sweep this under the rug, like you've done 100 times before." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp as a blade. "But here's the thing. You picked the wrong person this time." For the first time since this whole charade began, Whitmore's expression flickered with uncertainty. Just for a second. But Monica saw it, and she knew. She had him. The sound of screeching tires outside shattered the tense silence. Then the unmistakable voice of a dispatcher crackled over Whitmore's radio. "Dispatch to all units, federal agents on site, requesting immediate access to the facility. Repeat, federal agents on site." Whitmore and Coleman stiffened. The young man in the cell beside Monica straightened, his eyes darting between them. Monica smiled. "Guess my ride's here." Coleman grabbed his radio, his voice tight. "Who the hell called the feds?" Monica tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "I didn't have to." Whitmore's jaw tightened. Then, before he could say another word, the front door of the station slammed open. Heavy boots on tile. Purposeful. Unstoppable. Then came the voice. Loud. Commanding. "Where ETHE hell is my agent?" Whitmore paled. Monica stood, stretching out her sore muscles as the iron door of the holding cell swung open. Her smirk widened. Game over. The reckoning begins. The front doors of the Crenshaw County Sheriff's Office burst open with a force that shook the entire building. The sharp rhythm of polished boots echoed through the station as a team of federal agents stormed inside, their presence an undeniable force of authority. A towering man in a crisp navy blue suit led the charge, his deep voice cutting through the tense air like a blade. "Where the hell is Special Agent Monica Carter?" The room froze. Every uniformed officer in the building, corrupt or otherwise, went silent. Even the grizzled desk sergeant, who had barely lifted an eyebrow when Monica was brought in, suddenly found himself sitting a little straighter. The weight of real power had just walked through the door, and everyone knew it. Whitmore and Coleman, who had moments ago been so smugly confident, now looked like deer caught in headlights. Coleman reached instinctively for his radio, as if some last-minute call could fix the mess they were now drowning in. Whitmore, ever the arrogant one, tried to recover first. "This is a mistake, sir," Whitmore said, straightening his shoulders as he stepped forward. His voice had lost its earlier bravado, but he was still grasping at the illusion of control. "We arrested a suspect on probable cause. She had drugs in her vehicle." The man in the suit, Deputy Director Raymond Holt of the DEA, tilted his head, fixing Whitmore with a look so cold it could freeze fire. "Really? A DEA special agent was trafficking drugs through your county? That's the story you're sticking with?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Coleman swallowed hard, glancing toward Whitmore, as if silently pleading for him to come up with a way out of this. But there was no way out. Not anymore. Holt turned, nodding toward a female federal agent standing near the door. She stepped forward, a manila folder in her hands, flipping it open with calm precision. "We have reviewed the last 12 months of traffic stops conducted by Officers Ryan Whitmore and Daniel Coleman," she said, her voice steady, her tone lethal. "In that time, we found 17 incidents where charges were filed under suspicious circumstances. Victims reported cash, personal items, and even vehicles mysteriously disappearing. The majority of these cases were against people of color, and all but 2 were dismissed due to lack of evidence, which, we now suspect, was fabricated from the start." Whitmore's face had turned a sickly shade of white. Monica, who had been standing calmly beside her now open cell, took a step forward. "Sounds like a pattern to me," she said coolly. Coleman's hands clenched into fists. "You can't prove." The agent cut him off, holding up another document. "Actually, we can. Our forensic team is already combing through the evidence room. We've recovered multiple confiscated items that were never reported, stolen from civilians who were never even booked into the system. Your little side business, it's over." Holt folded his arms. "So, here's what's gonna happen," he said. "You 2 are done. As of this moment, you are relieved of duty. Hand over your weapons and badges." The command hung in the air like a death sentence. Whitmore's jaw clenched so hard Monica could see the veins in his neck bulging. His ego, his entire world, was crumbling in real time. "You don't have the authority to." "You're right," Holt said. "I don't." Then he turned slightly, motioning toward the 2 U.S. Marshals who had just entered the room. One of them, a broad-shouldered black man with a no-nonsense expression, pulled a warrant from his pocket and held it up. "We do," he said simply. And just like that, the last shred of control Whitmore and Coleman thought they had was stripped away. The Marshals moved in. Whitmore backed up instinctively, as if he actually thought he could talk his way out of it. "This is insane," he barked, voice cracking under the weight of his own desperation. "I did my job. You don't know what it's like out here." We have to do things our way. Your way, Monica said, raising an eyebrow. Your way involves planting drugs and stealing money from innocent people. They're not innocent, Whitmore snapped, his mask of control shattering. They're criminals. Every single one of them. And if they weren't guilty this time, they would be eventually. The room went so still that even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt deafening. Holt sighed, rubbing his temples. "Thank you," he said, "for making our case even easier." Whitmore opened his mouth to argue again, but the marshals weren't interested in his excuses. Within seconds, both he and Coleman had been disarmed, cuffed, and hauled out of the station. And just like that, it was over. For them, at least. The aftermath. Monica walked out of the Crenshaw County Sheriff's Office a free woman, her wrists sore but her spirit unshaken. The evening air was crisp, the sun now fully set, leaving only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the small parking lot. A crowd had gathered outside, locals who had heard the commotion, people who had likely suffered under Whitmore and Coleman's so-called justice for years. Among them was the young man from her holding cell, the one who had been locked up for 3 days without a phone call. When he saw her, he stepped forward hesitantly, uncertainty written across his face. "They said, they're letting me go," he said, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. "That the charges are dropped. That my record's gonna be cleared." Monica nodded. "That's right." He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his short hair. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she told him. "Just remember this feeling. And the next time someone tries to make you feel like you don't have a voice, fight back." He nodded, something hardening in his expression. Not fear, but determination. As Monica turned toward the black SUV where Holt was waiting, he called out one last time. "Hey," he said. "They thought they were untouchable. Thought they'd get away with it." Monica glanced over her shoulder, the corner of her mouth lifting into a smirk. "They all do," she said. Then she climbed into the SUV, and they drove off into the night. This battle was over. But Monica knew there were plenty more to come. And she'd be ready. The fallout. The ride back to headquarters was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between Monica and Holt as the black SUV sped down the highway. The adrenaline of the last few hours had finally begun to settle, but the weight of everything that had happened still sat heavy in her chest. She had been in situations like this before. Exposing corruption, dismantling criminal networks, bringing down powerful men who thought they were untouchable. But this wasn't just another case. This was personal. Whitmore and Coleman had nearly gotten away with it. They had been so confident, so arrogant in their belief that no one would come looking for her. And that confidence wasn't just built on their own corruption. It was built on a system that had protected them for years. A system that had allowed them to operate unchecked, destroying lives, taking money, and sending innocent people into a legal abyss from which there was no escape. She glanced out the window at the darkened landscape rolling past, her mind replaying the moment Whitmore had snapped. "They're not innocent. If they weren't guilty this time, they would be eventually." That sentence haunted her. How many lives had been ruined because of that mindset? How many people had been locked away on false charges just because a cop decided they were guilty before they even had a chance to defend themselves? The thought made her stomach turn. "Something on your mind?" Holt asked, not taking his eyes off the road. Monica sighed, rubbing the soreness out of her wrists where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin. "Just thinking." Holt gave a knowing nod. "About how deep this goes." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You and I both know this wasn't just two dirty cops running a side hustle. This was organized. Those planted drugs, they had to come from somewhere. The stolen money, it didn't just disappear. There's a whole network behind this. Someone's been protecting them." Holt exhaled through his nose, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Yeah," he admitted. "And now that we've pulled on the thread, we're about to find out just how big this mess really is." Monica folded her arms, staring straight ahead. Then let's find out. The domino effect. By the time Monica arrived back at the DEA field office in Atlanta, the storm had already begun. She stepped into the operations center, where a group of agents were huddled around a bank of computer monitors, scanning through files and listening to intercepted calls. The room was alive with the quiet hum of people digging deep, pulling records, and piecing together the puzzle. The moment Holt walked in behind her, one of the analysts turned, her face tense with urgency. "Sir, we got something." Holt strode forward, Monica right beside him. "Talk to me." The analyst pulled up a set of financial records on the screen. "We started looking into Whitmore and Coleman's bank accounts after their arrests. At first we found what you'd expect, small but frequent unexplained deposits, clearly payoffs for their false arrests. But then we went deeper, and that's where things got interesting." She tapped on the screen, zooming in on a series of larger transactions. "These payments don't just stop at Whitmore and Coleman," she continued. "They go up the chain. Direct deposits leading to offshore accounts, shell companies that don't actually exist. Somebody funded them, and they weren't just pocketing bribes. They were laundering money." Monica's lips pressed into a thin line. "For who?" The analyst clicked again, bringing up another screen. "That's where it gets murky. The transactions are being routed through multiple cutouts, but we found a common denominator, a name that keeps popping up in these accounts." She turned, her eyes sharp. "Sheriff Clayton Rourke." Monica felt her pulse tick up. Of course, Rourke had been the sheriff of Crenshaw County for over 15 years. He was known for being tough on crime, for running a department with an iron fist. On paper, he was the kind of man politicians love to champion, a small-town sheriff taking a stand against criminals. But if these financial records were correct, then the real criminals weren't on the streets. They were in his office. Holt let out a slow breath. "That son of a is about to have the worst day of his life." Monica finished for him. Holt turned to the team. "We need more. I want every piece of evidence we can get. Communications, internal reports, anything that ties work to this operation. If he's been protecting these guys, I want to prove it." The room sprang into action. Monica took a step back, crossing her arms as she watched the team work. The weight in her chest wasn't going away. Not yet. Not until she saw these bastards face real justice. The warning. The clock had just passed midnight when Monica stepped out onto the rooftop of the DEA building, needing a moment to clear her head. The city sprawled beneath her, lights twinkling against the darkened sky. She inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air settle the fire burning inside her. Then, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, her brows furrowing as she saw the number. Blocked. She hesitated only a second before answering. Carter. Silence. Then, a low, gravelly voice spoke. "You should walk away from this." Monica's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm sorry. I don't take career advice from cowards," she said coolly. A short chuckle. "I know who you are, Agent Carter. I know what you're trying to do. But let me give you a piece of advice. You don't take down men like Rourke. He's been running this county for years. You're just a Fed passing through. Do yourself a favor and get on the next flight back to D.C. before you make a very big mistake." Monica's jaw clenched. And who exactly am I talking to? The voice was quiet for a beat. Then, "Someone who's trying to do you a favor." Click. The line went dead. Monica lowered the phone slowly, staring out over the city. A warning. But it didn't scare her. It only confirmed one thing. They were afraid of her. And that meant she was on the right path. She slid the phone back into her pocket and exhaled, her resolve solidifying like steel. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Because this wasn't just about her. This was about every single person Whitmore and Coleman had victimized. And she was going to make damn sure work was next. The fall of a king. The sun had barely begun to rise over Atlanta when Monica Carter walked back into the DEA field office, the weight of the previous night still heavy on her mind. The warning call had been clear. Someone powerful was watching her. Someone who thought they could scare her off with a few veiled threats and an ominous phone call in the dead of night. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As she stepped into the operations center, the energy in the room was electric. Agents moved with purpose, voices low and urgent as they relayed updates, sifted through files, and analyzed the growing mountain of evidence against Sheriff Clayton Rourke. Holt was already there, standing at the head of a table covered in documents, financial reports, and surveillance photos. His expression was tight, his jaw set in a way that told Monica he'd been up all night. She pulled up a chair across from him and leaned forward. "Tell me you've got something." Holt slid a thick file toward her. "We've got everything." Monica flipped it open, scanning the first few pages. What she saw made her stomach churn. Wire transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars, funneled through fake charities, business fronts, and shell accounts that all led back to one man, Rourke. Phone records, conversations between Rourke and high-ranking traffickers, meetings that had been carefully logged but never followed up on, case files that mysteriously disappeared, arrest reports that were altered after booking. It was all there. Whitmore and Coleman had just been the foot soldiers. Rourke had been the general. Monica exhaled, shaking her head. This isn't just corruption. This is organized crime. Rourke isn't just protecting these traffickers. He's working with them. Holt nodded grimly. And it gets worse. We found evidence that 2 of our own cases were compromised because of him. He's been feeding our moves to his people for years. Every time we got close to shutting down a trafficking ring, he tipped them off. Monica clenched her jaw. How long have we got before he realizes the walls are closing in? Holt leaned back, rubbing a hand down his face. Not long, which is why we're not waiting. We're taking him down. She sat up straighter. When? Holt's eyes gleamed with determination. Right now. The arrest. They moved fast. Within 45 minutes, Monica and a team of U.S. Marshals were in an unmarked convoy, speeding toward Crenshaw County. They had sealed indictments, federal arrest warrants, and enough evidence to bury Rourke for life. Monica sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, adjusting the vest strapped over her black tactical uniform. Her badge glinted in the morning light, her weapon holstered at her hip. This wasn't just another operation. This was justice. For every innocent person who had been locked away on false charges. For every family torn apart by corruption. For every victim who had never gotten the chance to fight back. She was going to make damn sure Rourke answered for it all. The convoy reached Crenshaw County Sheriff's Office just after 7 a.m. Rourke's department was small, but his reach was long. His patrol units had already started their morning shifts, deputies coming and going from the station. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other day. They had no idea their world was about to collapse. Monica stepped out of the vehicle as Holt and the lead marshal approached her. The plan was simple. Move in, secure the building, take Rourke into custody before he had a chance to run. A few of Rourke's deputies were outside when the convoy pulled up, their faces shifting from confusion to alarm as they took in the sight of armed federal agents marching toward the entrance. Federal agents, hands where we can see them. The lead marshal's voice carried like a gunshot. The deputies hesitated, but they weren't stupid. One by one, they raised their hands, stepping back as the agents swept through the entrance. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officers at their desks froze. Some reached for their radios. Others just sat there, stunned. Then came the voice. What the hell is going on here? Monica turned just as Sheriff Clayton Rourke stepped out of his office, his face twisted in irritation. He was a big man, built like a linebacker, his graying hair cut short, his uniform crisp and neatly pressed. She saw at the moment he realized who she was. The flicker of recognition. The flash of fear. Then, just as quickly, He covered it up with anger. "This is my department," he growled, stepping forward. "You got a warrant to be in here." Holt held up a thick folder. Multiple, actually. He tossed the documents onto the nearest desk. "Sheriff Clayton Rourke, you are under federal arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting drug trafficking, and multiple civil rights violations." The room was dead silent. Rourke scoffed, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think you can just walk in here and—" "Cuff him," Monica interrupted. The marshals didn't wait. Rourke lunged. Big mistake. Monica moved before he even had a chance to react. In a single fluid motion, she twisted his arm behind his back and shoved him face first against the nearest desk. "I'd stay still if I were you, Sheriff," she murmured, pressing just enough pressure against his shoulder to make him grunt in pain. "Wouldn't want to add resisting arrest to the list." The cuffs clicked into place. Rourke was done. As they hauled him toward the door, Monica leaned in close. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she whispered. Rourke's eyes darkened. "This isn't over." Monica smiled. "Oh, it is. But don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to think about all your mistakes." From inside a federal prison. And with that, they dragged him out into the waiting convoy. Game over. The victory. By midday, the news had spread like wildfire. Monica sat in the DEA headquarters, watching the live coverage on the TV mounted on the wall. Breaking news. Crenshaw County Sheriff Clayton Rourke arrested on federal charges. Corruption exposed in small-town department. Sheriff linked to drug trafficking. DOJ confirms ongoing investigation into additional officers. The fallout was immediate. Deputies started talking, cutting deals, exposing the entire corrupt network that had been operating for years under Rourke's protection. And Monica? She was already looking toward the next case. Holt walked up behind her, arms crossed. "It's a good win." She nodded. "Yeah." He studied her for a moment. "So, what's next?" Monica exhaled slowly, watching as the news replayed footage of Rourke being led away in cuffs. Then she smirked. "We keep going." The aftermath. The halls of the DEA headquarters were unusually quiet that evening. Monica sat at her desk, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her like a heavy storm cloud. The case was officially over. Rourke was in federal custody. Whitmore and Coleman had already been processed, and more of Rourke's men were turning on him by the hour. Justice had been served. But why did it still feel like something was unfinished? She rubbed at the faint bruising around her wrists where the cuffs had dug in during her wrongful arrest. It wasn't the physical pain that lingered. It was the knowledge that she had only scratched the surface. Rourke was a big name, but he wasn't the only one. There were others like him, scattered across counties, towns, and cities, men who used the law as a weapon instead of a shield, who manipulated a broken system to serve their own greed. And Monica wasn't done with them. Her thoughts were interrupted when Holt stepped into her office, a coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. His expression was unreadable, but she had known him long enough to recognize when he had something important to say. "You look like hell," he said, setting the coffee on her desk. Monica smirked. "You should see the other guy." Holt chuckled, but the amusement faded quickly. He set the folder down, flipping it open. "We've been going through the names of everyone who had direct contact with Rourke's operation, and there's something I think you should see." Monica leaned forward, scanning the pages. Bank statements, transactions, lists of contacts. Then, one name stood out. She felt her pulse quicken. ADA Philip Monroe, Assistant District Attorney, a man who had signed off on dozens of cases in Crenshaw County, cases where evidence had gone missing, cases that had mysteriously fallen apart right before trial, cases that had been dismissed under technicalities. Cases just like hers. She exhaled slowly. He knew. Holt nodded grimly. Not just knew. He covered for them. Anytime someone tried to push back. Lawyers, journalists, even a few state officials, Monroe made sure it got buried. He leaned back against her desk, arms crossed. We're building a case against him now, but it's gonna take time. He's careful, clever. Unlike Quark, he doesn't get his hands dirty. He keeps everything just far enough away that nothing sticks. Monica's jaw clenched. That's what they always think. A heavy silence settled between them. Holt studied her for a moment. You don't have to be the one to take this on, he said, voice low. You've already done enough. You can step back. Let the rest of us handle it. Monica let out a slow breath, then shook her head. That's not how I work. Holt sighed, as if he already knew that would be her answer. Yeah, figured as much. She smirked. Wouldn't be any fun otherwise. He chuckled, shaking his head. You really don't know how to take a break, do you? Monica leaned back in her chair, stretching her sore muscles. Justice doesn't take breaks. And neither do I. Holt rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Instead, he pushed the folder toward her. Then I guess we better get to work. Monica took it without hesitation, flipping to the next page. She had taken down one king. But the kingdom was still standing. And she was just getting started.